Part 3. I could go on forever. I love talking about this stuff. Four-wheel drive vehicle choices. I'm actually going to talk about brands. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through my book. Now, just a little bit of history. I wrote my first book in 1993. I've written, I think it's 15, and in fact it's available on Amazon. There's a digital version of this book on Amazon. But what it doesn't include in that book, the link is below by the way, is the chapter on vehicles. And the reason for that is that it's a little bit old, and also I've got a lot of viewers in the United States, and not being familiar with the US market, there's a big chunk of it missing. So I didn't want to kind of publish an incomplete. So you're going to have to watch these videos if you want to know more about what I think about specific vehicles. And I'm going to go through the vehicle chapter. This book, this hardcover book, by the way, I must tell you, this is a red letter year for this book. It's the last, I have 20 left, exactly 20 left, one box. And it first went into production, published in South Africa in 1993. We've printed approximately 120,000 in total. And it has been on sale in that country for 24 years uninterrupted. And the last one was actually sold about 2 months ago in South Africa, so it's no longer available anywhere. And I have 20 left that I will sell at any trade expos that I go to. Back to vehicles. Right, I'm going to just go through the, so I don't miss any of them out. One of the comments, and I'm going to jump the gun a little bit on the thing, part 2, what about a Isuzu DMax? I used an Isuzu DMax in 2015 on a trip to Zambia with my daughter Kate. The link is below if you haven't seen that series. And the idea was to take a stock vehicle, not do anything. All I changed were the tires. I was testing the new all-terrain KO2 BF Goodrich at the time. They had just been released. We've been now from Patalk when we left the road. So we've done 75 kilometers and it has taken us 3.5 hours. So you do the maths. Beautiful country, remote country, but what it means is that we're not going to reach the gate to the South Luangwa National Park today. No chance. We are going to have to wild camp somewhere en route. We're just going to push on till about 5 o'clock. That's another hour and a half, and then look for a campsite. And we did a trip through Zambia to see a lightly loaded, we put on a canopy on the back, tent on top, but we had not modified the vehicle. No suspension changes, no major changes to the vehicle at all. The Isuzu DMax is one of the most underrated utes pickups available. I think it is outstanding. Its build quality is first rate. It feels solid. That motor, that 3-litre turbo diesel motor, is wonderful. It was frugal, responsive. I really rate the DMax extremely highly. It's a little bit lacking in clearance, and so modifying it, you can't give it much of a lift that you might do on, say, a Hilux or a Ford Ranger, but really good. Really good. It equals Toyota's quality. No question about it. It definitely equals Toyota's quality. And I speak here about the 10 golden rules about choosing a four-wheel drive truck. Not all 4x4s are created equal. That's true. And another piece of advice I give here, know more about four-wheel drives than the person in the showroom, because he'll take you for a ride and sell you. And one of the things that I spoke about here is, and it doesn't happen that much these days, but it used to be very, very big. A salesman will say a two-wheel drive with a rear diff lock will go exactly almost everywhere a four-wheel drive will go. That is complete and utter nonsense. Beware of the other myth that says a four-wheel drive without low range can do almost as much as a four-wheel drive with low range. Rubbish! It's complete rubbish. It's so common in a showroom. It's nonsense. Low range and good clearance are the key. They are the key. If it doesn't have those two things, but what's more important, clearance or low range? Clearance. at the end of the day, actually clearance. Because a lot of trips that you don't really need four-wheel drive, but you need some clearance to get the vehicle away from the rocks and the stones and things that are being thrown up underneath the vehicle, and the wear and tear. The closer the vehicle is to the ground, the higher the wear and tear, full stop. So you need that clearance, but low range enables you to go that much further. And then, are differential locks necessary? Axle differential locks are not necessary for an overland vehicle. They're just plain not necessary. They're nice to have, bit of insurance, and when it gets really tough, a rear diff lock can be very often really useful. Are they necessary? No. Clearances, low ranges, they are necessary. Full-time four-wheel drive vehicle versus part-time four-wheel drive vehicle. Full-time does have some advantages. Is it a make or break? Is it a deal breaker? Deal breaker? No, not a deal breaker at all. Okay, and be careful not to be dazzled by the words diff lock. If a diff lock is in the center, all it is a different way of engaging four-wheel drive. It's not a diff lock as, a differential between left and right axles. That differential locks the wheels together. They can't do this, they do this, i.e. more traction, more pulling power. Front and back does the same. It makes sure that one back wheel will rotate it exactly the same as one of the front wheels. That's the same as engaging four-wheel drive in a part four-wheel drive system. So be careful of the words differential lock. They can mean two different things. Let's have a look at some of the vehicles that in my buyer's guide. We mentioned some of the Fords and the Ford Ranger that looks really good, but it doesn't have a great reliability issue, but they look good and their engines are really nice. And the Ford Everest has become very soft. They've taken away a lot of its inbuilt strength and it's become really kind of a general soft SUV. I don't know it particularly well. It's very similar to the Fortuner. Fortuner is also a bit of a soft four-wheel driver, isn't it? I drove the early Fortuners and I was very impressed with them. I thought they were such a lovely example of a small, compact station wagon with very good off-road ability. They're not built as strongly as a Land Cruiser. Land Cruiser, because, Prado or 200 or 70, in the moment they've got that word Land Cruiser in their name, it means that they're built considerably stronger than, say, a Hilux or Fortuner. That type of vehicle, that not very expensive SUV, if it's got clearance, it's got low range, actually work very well as fun family four-wheel drives and can be used for overland trips. And that includes Everest, includes Fortuner, and of course the Mitsubishi, the Pajero Sport. The new model is really, when you drive behind it, it looks like it's crying. It's got those funny lights that go down the side. I don't know it. I don't work with Mitsubishi. They wouldn't give me one to test drive. They don't want me to touch it, so I haven't. That's a different story altogether. The Hummer. Now the Hummer, big fat thing. Do I have a lot of respect for it? No. Is it any good off-road? Well, the Hummer 3, not very. It's okay, pretty average. H2, I don't know too much about it, to be honest with you. I just think it's big, ugly, bling, and altogether unnecessary. So when I see them, I just go, ooh. But I guess they have their own appeal. Isuzu KB, mentioned the Isuzu KB. The Isuzu Frontier, they don't make the same one as but they do make a similar. It's based on the DMax, and again, it's like the Fortuner. It's that same type of light duty SUV, and I actually think they're really quite nice. They're actually quite dull to drive around town, I find them, that particular vehicle. So if you're thinking about that or a saloon car just for around town, actually most similar saloon, actually, yeah, they're okay. But when you actually get out into the bush with them, they're actually a lot of fun. They actually really are. Isuzu Trooper. It was called the Jackaroo in Australia. I was quite impressed with that vehicle, actually. I drove it on a few trips and I actually quite liked it. I'm not a Jeep expert, so I can't really go into the different types of Jeeps and their advantages and disadvantages. Suffice to say that the Jeep Commander and some of the Cherokees, really, they're not off-road vehicles at all in the slightest degree. They're city cars. Here's another thing to consider when looking at a four-wheel drive vehicle to buy, and that is ground clearance and how it's measured. Now, if you look at the brochure, sales brochure, and you see the amount of millimeters. I see people often quoting that, and it sometimes can be extremely misleading because, I'll give you an example. Mercedes M-Class has higher clearance on paper than the Mercedes G-Wagon 461 series. Mercedes G-Wagon 461 series, one of the best off-road vehicles ever. They are superb off-road. They are outstanding. Why? Because the way the gearbox is built, everything's higher than the chassis. It's got solid axles that are built like a girder bridge. The whole undercarriage and everything is really built. It's brilliant. And yet it has a lower clearance than an M-Class. That is really very, very soft city four-wheel drive. And even though the M-Class has not terrible clearance, it doesn't have great clearance, but to compare the two. So it's misleading. How does the vehicle hold on to its clearance when driving over uneven terrain is the question. And the best way of doing that, and you know, without actually testing each individual vehicles, and if you look at the different vehicles and the way they perform and how they keep their clearance off-road, differs enormously with suspension system, with coil springs and torsion bars and leaf springs at the back, all of these different things. But the easiest way to look at it, strangely enough, is to go into the showroom and look at the vehicle on a flat surface and walk around it and say, does that clearance look good or not so good? You can almost judge by that. Because a vehicle with a differential like a 70 series Land Rover or Land Cruiser, Land Rover Defender, G-Wagon have the differential underneath the axle, and they measure underneath that, which is only about this much. But because it's a solid axle, when this wheel lifts, it lifts with it. So as the wheel goes up, the clearance goes up. Whereas an independent suspension, the suspension does this, there's the drive shaft and there's the axle, and the wheel does this. So when the wheel's like that, it's lower, isn't it? The clearance is lower. And likewise on the other side, whereas an axle, it picks it up. So you cannot use the measurement as a clear indicator. You can use it as a rough indicator, but you have to be very careful. Walking around the vehicle is often the best way of saying, yes, this has got good clearance, or no, it hasn't. Look at the breakover angles, look at that angle, look at that angle, look at an angle. Just sit there and imagine the vehicle being lifted a little bit. Remember, when you lift a little bit vehicle with a solid axle, only a larger profile tire will raise it. With an independent suspension, you're actually doing, the vehicle's here, you're doing this. The vehicle's staying where it is, and you're pushing the wheels down or lifting the body up, so you're giving more clearance. So with an independent, but remember, most independent suspension vehicles, the majority of them, had solid axle at the back, independent at the front. So what's it doing to your clearance? It's improving it at the front, but not improving it at the back. So you can get a bit complicated, and I like to say to people, to judge a vehicle's clearance, walk around it and get an impression, and then look at those axles and the way they're mounted, and you'll learn a lot from that thing. We spoke about Land Rovers. I'm posting a video quite soon, my relationship with Land Rover series. It's a good story. And I have a very good relationship with the Land Rovers that I've owned. I have owned Range Rover, Defender, which was actually a 110 at the time, Discovery 1, Range Rover Classic 1996, last of the classics. And those were my 4 Land Rover products that I owned, and I loved them all except for the Discovery. I didn't think the Discovery was, even though I actually think the Discovery is quite a good vehicle for newcomers, as I said, I didn't enjoy it. It was too small. It was very pokey inside. For my use as the family, it was too small for me. Land Rover Discovery 3 and 4. I won't mention the 5. Such a huge technical leap from Discovery 1 and 2. My experience is they are really good machines. Those of you know my Lesotho trip, where we really pushed a Land Rover LR4 to its limits in Lesotho, will know how well it performed off-road. But let's put it into real perspective. All right, if you want a Land Rover 3 or 4 for an overland vehicle, this is what you've got to be aware of. This is your problem. Yes, it has air suspension. We've mentioned that before. But the other big problem with it is tires. Oh, this is interesting. Okay, we have here Discovery 4. This is not abandoned, and we know that because 2 times massive sidewall punctures on the left-hand side. Both spares suffered same later. Vehicle is not abandoned. Owner is safe with other vehicles in convoy, gone to get new tires, back to vehicle on the 2nd of October. It is now the 4th of October. Well, that's sad for them. Land Rover insists that you wear they have a limited approved tire. I'm not surprised they're broken. Poor guys. Anyway, I hope they manage to get back and sort it out. That's not much fun. 2012, when I took my Discovery 4 on the trip through Lesotho, the Baboons Pass, I asked if I could fit BF Goodrich tyres to the vehicle, and Land Rover said no. They're not an approved tyre, and they gave me a list, and they said, you may choose, we're happy to upgrade the tyres for you, you may choose. And I chose a General Grabber that had quite a good reputation, and I pumped them up extremely hard. So the big question is, what pressure to pump my tyres? Now the vehicles travelling with me will be running their huge tyres probably at half a bar. Now because I have low profile tyres, I just can't do that. If I did, my tyres would be destroyed in the first 10 minutes. So what I'm going to do is the exact opposite. I'm going to make them very hard. 3 bar in fact. I want to protect them. It wasn't a test of the tyres, it was a test of the vehicle. And I remember about 6 weeks, 8 weeks after the Baboons trip, I nicked a curb in the vehicle. I just nicked it, just in traffic, and I just ripped the sidewall clean off. And it's the trouble with any low profile tyre wheel combination. The moment you have a high profile tyre, therefore a narrow sidewall, the moment you let it down, the ratio of flex to height is higher, which means the amount of heat buildup is higher. Because remember, it's all about heat when you let down tyres. If you let down tyres and they flex too much, they will get hot and destroy themselves. And what happened with this chap, he was driving on this trail, very obviously, not going fast, but he let his tyres down to the point where the sidewalls were bending so much that they split, and I looked at the damage and it was typical heat split sidewall failure. He was carrying 2 spares. He had used 4 tyres, and obviously didn't realize you can't let them down. You've got to keep them pumped up, otherwise they will destroy themselves. So the biggest single problem, apart from the air suspension, which can be an issue for very remote trails, but for Discovery 4's biggest single problem is, and the same with all of these vehicles, Range Rovers and everything, is tyres. You can't reduce the pressure in a low profile tyre to the point where you get optimum performance without damaging the tyre. You just can't do it. And as many of these write-ups I see in magazines, and very well-respected magazines and things like that, about how wonderful the new Range Rover is, I'm sorry guys, there is a compensation here. And while the traction control systems on these vehicle LR4 included brilliant traction control system, outstanding, even better with the new Discovery 5 terrain response in the new Range Rover, they are amazing technologies. They are. I don't take anything away from them. Okay, they're amazing vehicles. For rugged overland trails, they're not suitable. You'll do 1 or 2, you'll damage or break the vehicle, you'll have problems with tyres in the long term. It's unavoidable. It's completely unavoidable. And if I think about people that do trails in Australia, I've spoken to people here, LR4, and I ask them, LR4, and then they say they don't last. They don't last. 2 or 3 tough trails, and they need major money spent on them. As a general rule, though, the LR4 and LR3, as nice as they are, if you're buying a used one, here's my advice. See what you can do about getting the smallest rim available, and I think it might be 18-inch, and then buy every warranty they want to sell you. Because they're good probably for 150,000 kilometers, 100,000 miles-ish. Then they start becoming expensive, and then they become very expensive because they're very expensive vehicles to work on. I should do a separate video. My relationship with Mahindra, it was short and it was sweet. There it is there. Now I made the mistake of putting, and they paid me quite a lot of money. And they said, please, we want our truck, we want our car on the front of your book. We really, really want it. And they gave me a lot of money to put it, and I shot a lovely picture and everything. And it was the worst mistake I could have made because sales of that particular edition were far lower than any other edition I'd ever published. It was the wrong vehicle to have on a four-wheel drive book cover, full stop. But I'll do a separate video on the Mahindra. There's a good story attached to it. Anyway, that kind of vehicle, they're cheap. And they're, I wouldn't say cheap and nasty, but they're cheap. And getting spare parts for Australia, even South Africa, Mahindra. Don't buy a Mahindra if you're in South Africa. They have no spare parts backup. None. None. They can't even fulfill warranties claims. Don't do it. MercedesGLE, there's a separate video that'll be released about my relationship with Mercedes G-Wagon. If you're thinking about a G-Wagon, I love the G-Wagon. But the 463 model, really be very, very careful. The later 463 models, the GD300, I think it is, and then of course the 500, be careful because there are some of them that are really, you have to spend a lot of money on them to get them right for overland off-road travel, because the story in 2013, 6 or 7 G-Wagons did the Canning stock route, and before they got even halfway, all but one had suffered catastrophic suspension failure. They're just not built for it. And the only one that actually did the whole trip with no problems at all was a 461 series. So the 461 series is the one that you want. That's the basic one. The interior is basic. The dashboard is still not from 1979. They haven't changed the dashboard, except for the binnacle. They haven't changed the dashboard. Good luck in finding one. I don't think Mercedes now still offer it. The Professional, the 300 GD Professional has, I drove one. But today I'm here to drive one of my favorite four-wheel drives. Harib Gliding Center is completely deserted. The dozens of German pilots that flock here every year have all gone back to their rainy skies. And I'm here to get a feel for one of their least common four-wheel drive station wagons. The MercedesGLE 300G Professional. I loved it, but their reputation for reliability is shocking. Really bad. Scarily bad. I don't know why, but I just love the vehicle, and there's something about a G-Wagon, when you drive it, it's like the vehicle has been honed out of a single cast block of aluminium. It's just been, and it's been machined out. It's one solid piece of machinery. They're fantastic. Complicated. They do require quite a lot of tools. One of their weaknesses are the front hubs. Service the front hubs regularly. It's one of their weaknesses. Front differential lock actuators. It's another weakness. But they don't have a lot of weaknesses. Really, really great vehicles. And I rate them extremely high. And off-road, I have never owned an off-road vehicle as good as my G-Wagon. I had two 290 GDs, both 461 series, and none of the vehicles I ever had. And particularly my last one, which had very high profile tires, and it had a higher race suspension, which was standard, NATO spec, but off-road, this thing was just fantastic. Absolutely love the G-Wagon, but just be very careful on which one you get, because some of them are not good at all. Suzuki. I've had a lot of people say, what about Suzuki? Underrated, underrated. To be honest with you, I haven't. I know the SJ, the old SJ40. If you were at four-wheel drive meet and you know, you were standing next to one and you know, something got up your nose and you move away from the vehicle if you're going to have a good sneeze. It might fall over. All right, so the Jimny looks like an enormous amount of fun. They're very small. So for even two people going on an overland trip, you can't carry enough fuel. You don't have the size, weight, payload and everything to carry enough fuel for really ambitious trips. Otherwise, they're enormous fun. So I think a lot of the Suzukis are a little bit underrated, and a few of them are overrated as well. The Vitaras, the new Vitaras, they're nothing special. I don't think they're anything special. Subaru Forester, still one of my favorite vehicles. I don't think they're getting better. The earlier Subaru had this beautiful handling. It was such a lovely vehicle to drive. The newer ones, I think they're a little bit ordinary. We mentioned the Fortuner, Land Cruisers. Now let's go onto Land Cruisers a little bit. The 80 series Land Cruiser I've seen quoted many, many times as Toyota's finest hour. And I kind of agree. Toyota's very good at copying others because they are superb copycats. But they don't just copy. They generally say, okay, well, how can we make it better? And the proof is, well, if you think about the early vehicles that had all-round coil springs, was the 1985 was the Defender, 79 was probably the, well, 70 was the Range Rover, then 79 G-Wagon. And after all of those had been released and were successful, out came the 80 series Land Cruiser. If you look around now, what vehicles do you see lots and lots and lots and lots of? Even really old ones? 80 series Land Cruisers. They are everywhere. They keep going forever. That is one of the best engineered four-wheel drive station wagons. And don't call it an SUV. SUV to me is a synonymous for, you know, light duty, kind of like a Fortuner or a Forester. That to me is an SUV. 80 series is an off-roader. It's an tough, reliable, really well engineered. And they had some great engines in the 80. When they came out with the 100, of course, they dispensed with the independent suspension in the top models, but not in all of the models. They made a 100 series called a 105. The 105 basically was a 100 series body with an 80 series chassis. I owned two of them. Fantastic. Fantastic vehicle, but they didn't put any great engines in them. You could get the 1HZ, which was underpowered, or you could get the 6-cylinder 4.5 petrol, which was pretty good, very tough, robust engine, very thirsty. They never put their turbo diesels in the 105. No country did. Japan, I mean, Toyota didn't do it, which was the biggest letdown. So in that respect, actually, the 80 is a bit better because it has better engines, but the 100 was quite a bit safer. It was bigger, and it was safer. It had a much higher safety rating than the 80. Land Cruiser FJ, I think it's a very nice vehicle. It's enormous fun to drive. It has Prado underpinnings, Prado 120 underpinnings. They've stopped making it in the United States, which is a disappointment, but had a good long run. Good used ones now are going for quite a lot of money. For a family of four, even though it's a four-door, forget it. It's so cramped, it's like a cave in the back there. It really is a one or two persons four-wheel drive plaything. Small fuel tanks, standard fuel tanks, even when they enlarged it by one side, still pretty small. Payload's not great. Wonderful off-road, great to look at, wonderful to kit out. And I know a lot of people that kitted out the FJ Land Cruiser and ruined its off-road performance by putting tires that were too wide on it, just going too far, and actually ruining its performance. I've seen that quite often, actually, quite a few vehicles, but the FJ, quite common. The stock FJ, put some slightly larger tires on it, don't make them too wide, a bit more aggressive on the tread, give it a 2-inch lift, no more, And that vehicle is phenomenal off-road. Absolutely phenomenal little thing. It'll keep up with almost anything. Really, really wonderful. Prado 120, 150. I think the Prado 150 is one of the ugliest cars around. I think that front grille is so ugly. So please put an ARB bull bar on it. And the reason why I say is the ARB bull bar is the ARB bull bar actually makes it look a little bit better. The TJM bull bar, those bull bars that go up at the side here, ooh, I find them so ugly. Just no taste at all. They're good trucks. They're really good trucks. They're good. And the diesel, if I compare the performance of the Prado with the D4D diesel, it's underpowered compared to, say, Discovery 4, for example, and a lot of the others. It's a bit underpowered. But it's, again, like the Land Cruiser 200, it's got the basics for a very good off-road vehicle for tough trails. And somebody asked me, could a stock Prado do the canning stock route? And my answer was yes. Stock. You're going to need to change the tires. Those standard tires probably wouldn't survive. Would it, if you don't, as long as you don't overload it, I think a stock Prado would do canning stock with no problem at all. In fact, you could probably do it several times with no problem at all. So it's a good vehicle. My own vehicles, I've got a couple of pages here on my own vehicles, and I'll go through them very quickly. Range Rover Defender, another Range Rover Classic, G-Wagon, Discovery 1, Land Cruiser 79. It was a pickup and I had it converted to a double cab because Toyota didn't do a double cab at that stage. G-Wagon, that was my second G-Wagon. I got a NATO spec G-Wagon off-road. It was phenomenal. 105 petrol powered 105 Land Cruiser, then which I didn't keep for long because it was just too heavy on fuel, and it wasn't great for expeditions because you'd carry so much fuel that you couldn't carry a whole lot of other stuff. You couldn't carry water and everything because it was just all fuel, and that was his problem. 76 Land Cruiser, I got one of the very first 76. That was the new Land Cruiser with the widened front end, but in South Africa, of course, no V8 at that stage. We had the 1.8Z engine in that. I found the vehicle quite dull. I didn't enjoy it. Then I replaced that with a 105 with the turbo diesel, with the same 1.8Z engine, but 105 body, and I put a small turbocharger in it. Just a small one, just so you can get past the trucks. And I love that vehicle. Absolutely love that vehicle. And of course, since then, the two vehicles that I've owned have been my two Land Cruiser 78 Troopies. The first one had 1.8Z, built in South Africa, and the second one, of course, here, built it in Australia. Keep the comments coming. I will try and respond to any vehicles that I've missed. There are hundreds that I've missed. And keep an eye out for my story time videos. They're coming up quite soon. I've got a great one with Land Rover series, as I mentioned, and Pajero, my relationship with Toyota, and a whole lot more. Keep an eye out for those. They're going to be coming up within the next month or so. And of course, if you'd like to be part of our world, support me on Patreon. Thank you for watching. If you would like to be part of what I do and help me make more videos, support me on Patreon. Click the Patreon button on the screen now.